and welcome to episode 38 of That 60s Recording Podcast, the podcast that has conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. I hope you've all had a lovely week. I've got a very exciting guest for you this week, and I am really looking forward to you hearing this conversation. My guest is Bob Olhsson, who was the mastering engineer, the in-house mastering engineer at Motown Studios in Detroit. I haven't really covered Motown at all, so when I managed to get a link up with Bob, I was so excited to cover this topic, really. Motown is a style of music that I adore, and just the chance to speak with somebody that was involved in some seminal recordings like that is, it's just too good to be true. It was amazing. He's such an insightful guy. He's a really happy guy. So I think you'll really enjoy this conversation. We talked for a long time, so I've split this conversation into 3 parts. And yeah, I think that was the right thing to do. I didn't really want to leave anything out because there's some nuggets of wisdom all over this conversation. And I thought the only fair thing to do was to just give you it in its entirety. So that's what I've done, and this will be going on for the next 3 weeks. I foolishly managed to delete my audio, or maybe I just didn't even push record on my audio. I recorded the Zoom conversation, and it was going through an interface and all that kind of thing. So the sound quality is good, but not my voice is not as good as normal, which you'll notice. Not as good as normal. You know what I mean. So anyway, you can still hear it. It just doesn't sound like it usually sounds. As you'll hear, we'd started the conversation quite naturally, and that seems to have been a trend for the next few interviews that you're going to hear, actually. And I'm enjoying that rather than sort of an official hard start to the interview, if you like. So I much more enjoy doing that. I think that's probably why I forgot to push record. So anyway, I hope you'll enjoy this conversation. I'm not going to tell you about my isolated drums this week because I don't know what they're going to be. I am quite busy at the studio at the moment, so I'm kind of flying by the seat of my pants, as it were. That's pants in the English sense of the word, like underwear, as opposed to pants in the American sense of the word, which are just normal trousers. Anyway, just a reminder that all of these episodes are on YouTube now. I've been uploading them to YouTube, so if you search either That 60s Recording Podcast or All You Need Is Drums, you can find all these episodes on YouTube. So anyway, we're going to dive into this conversation. Here we go. Bob Olhsson, part 1 of 3. Here we go.
The anniversary of what's going on, it's been a bit, although thinking about it being 50 years ago is freaky.
Wow, yeah.
God.
You don't look old enough for it to have been to have been a young man at that time.
Yeah, I was in my 20s.
Yeah,
we all were. I was.
Yeah.
That's what's wrong with music today. There's too many old people.
Yeah, we could talk about just that, couldn't we? It's I think everybody's got so much access to everything they could want these days that they're not learning the proper, they're not learning properly, and there's too much choice and too many options to edit and all that kind of stuff. That's what I think anyway.
Oh yeah, well back then you didn't have the possibilities of doing 10 takes and putting the pieces together and tuning them. It's funny. We actually had technology for tuning, believe it or not. It was a tape-based thing, but we never talked about it. We didn't want anybody knowing about it because it was such a pain in the neck.
Oh, I can imagine. How did it work? What was it?
I gather it was a tape loop thing. It was a company called Eltro.
Okay. I can't say I've heard of it. I didn't know it existed.
And yeah, well, it was unique in terms of music. See, all this stuff was invented in the late 20s in the movie industry.
Yeah, it's I did an episode on sort of the history of microphones, and kind of gathered that a lot of microphone sort of technology gathered steam throughout the movie industry, as you say, in the 20s and 30s.
Oh yeah, that was the market. Let me get my microphone pointing at me. Okay. Yeah, it really, in fact, that was one of the main influences of technology at Motown.
Yeah.
Is that Mike McLean, our chief engineer, was a huge movie buff.
I didn't know that.
And had worked in a theater basically from, I guess, the time he was 15 or 16 years old, he'd worked in theaters, and
Wow.
and that was really his thing. And from what I understand, and from what he told me, he read about the way to allow a tape machine to drop in an article in the Society for Motion Picture Television Engineers journal, because RCA had built this thing for, I think it was Glen Sound in Hollywood. And so that it meant that they could record. I mean, the problem had been that a reel was about 10 minutes and you had to get a perfect mix.
Oh.
And they could be mixing 40 different, I mean, it was massive. It was massive compared to anything in music. And so you would have typically 3 people working on it, and they had to get a perfect take in 10 minutes. And so the punch-in ability meant that they could go back and edit and drop into because they were recording to 35 millimeter magnetic film, film coated like tape.
Yeah.
And, but apparently they couldn't really cut it without it being a problem.
Okay.
Couldn't splice it. So, without making a noise.
Interesting. I didn't know anything.
So anyhow, he adapted that to Motown's 3-track machines. And we were actually doing phrase by phrase punch downs very early on, from what I gather. I started in 1965.
Yes.
So it was already, they had gotten 8-track in 1964.
It was from what I've read about sort of your time there and Motown in general, it just seems way ahead of its time completely.
Oh, it was. I mean, I had no idea how far ahead of its time was until I left, moved to San Francisco, and then was shocked at how primitive Wally Heider recording was, which was the top.
Man, so are you happy just diving right in? Because I mean, I guess we've already started chatting a little bit. I usually do a little bit of an intro, but I'm happy just to crack on if you're happy.
I don't mind.
Fantastic. I was I mean, there's so much I want to ask you. I was trying to think of a good place to start, and I wondered if you could. How would you describe sort of what you are essentially, because I think mastering engineer only doesn't quite do it justice. So I wondered, in your words, what would you
Oh
call
no.
yourself?
Well, mastering, I mean, I used to call the cutting room at Motown my nerd cave. Because I mean, at that time, our job was to get the hottest possible 45 single recording. Because, see, the challenge was to get through the broadcast programming meeting where they decided what was going to go on the air.
Okay.
And so our focus was getting through those meetings, because everybody sat in on one where something got completely overlooked because it wasn't as loud as all the rest.
That doesn't surprise me somehow.
Yeah, that same game is still going on.
Yeah.
I mean, that's really what it's all about, and it's about that first impression. And where it gets wild is that the broadcasters actually figured out that if you have too much distortion, people tune out after a minute or two.
Mm.
And so you actually don't engage the audience as well as you can with something with dynamics and clarity.
That makes sense. You get tired. Yeah, tired listening to it.
People don't want to believe it, but but apparently that's it. But now we're awash in this hipster idea that being as loud as possible. I say, see, the thing of it is, in vinyl, the peak limiting, the what they call brick wall peak limiting, didn't buy you any more level. What controlled the level was the amount of low end on the recording. And of course, we wanted to have plenty of low end, but we also wanted to have uniformity so that we would have a master tape that could go anywhere in the world and have a flat cut.
It makes me wonder about. So my background is in a lot of Beatles music and sort of obviously British 60s stuff, and I know the Beatles had a big thing about the records coming from the US having a lot of low end on them, and the records they were making not. What do you think it was that Motown had that gave it that sort of thick richness?
Well, we were aiming at that richness.
Okay.
And I think EMI wanted, and they did this at Capitol in the US too, they saw disc mastering as a get it out quick, just run it through a bunch of stuff, and don't even pay any attention to the settings. And one of the things they would do is they would high pass stuff.
Okay.
High pass everything and run it through a Fairchild, which, I mean, Fairchild sounded awful. It's it's been a real eye roller. We were so happy to get rid of the Fairchilds.
Yeah, I have some questions about that later. Yeah.
Great irony. But, well, the biggest problem with the Fairchild was that they would go through tubes in a couple months. You'd have to replace the tubes. So I'm not sure how many younger people have ever even heard one that was working properly.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I mean, I certainly haven't heard a. I think I've been I may have used one in a studio a few times, but they're not common. An old one anyway. A vintage one.
Yeah. Oh, well, they were expensive. I mean, that's why we had several at Motown, and the valve ones or the tube ones. Their transistor stuff was horrible. Oh God. And we had some of that. See, the thing of it is, back then, no normal person could afford to own a studio. And the studio owners were almost never recording engineers. And so you would basically talk the boss into buying something. And then if it turned out to be a piece of shit, you would just quietly not use it.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
I guess it's different that, I've been reading a lot about Pultex recently, because I've done an interview with Steve, who's restarted the Pultec company. And I guess it's about shipping, the reps for those companies would ship gear around the studios because no one had heard of this stuff yet. It's not like now where the internet exists and everybody knows about everything. You go and try something out, and it's just what was presented to you was what you bought.
Yeah.
Sorry, there's a lorry going past. I live on a building site at the moment. I was wondering about I want to talk a little bit about your journey into Motown, specifically your sort of Saturdays at United and what you learned as a sort of 16-year-old watching how that studio operated.
Well, it was interesting. My real training was actually in the 8th through 12th grades, where I was in a radio drama program.
Ah.
And that's where I learned about microphones and mixing and tape editing. And
so were you were involved in the technical side of it as opposed to acting in it?
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
And I learned a lot from that. I learned that commercial radio, what's for sale is the audience.
Well, yes.
And that's the key to understanding the music industry. The very important thing to understand that the audience buys the music, but everybody else is basically buying the audience that will buy the music. And so I learned that in high school, because we had a woman from an ad agency come in and talk to us.
Ah.
And I was lucky because my teachers had both been producers at NBC.
Oh, I didn't know that. That's really cool.
And what happened was, after the war, the Army had trained a lot of men to do the armed forces radio thing. And after the war, they offered a tax credit to people hiring veterans.
Mm.
And so the networks basically fired everybody they could so they could replace them with a veteran.
Man.
And that especially applied to women. And these women had both actually been at the network before the war. It wasn't that they were replacing men who had gone off to war. But almost everybody got canned. In fact, it's hilarious because in many ways, commercial broadcast radio, a lot of it was invented by a woman.
Ah, I didn't know that either.
We had her name was Judith Waller.
Judith.
Judith.
Yeah, I'm going to look her up.
Waller. And there's a little bit of information about her on the internet. What happened was she was a advertising copywriter and a librarian. And the editor of one of the newspapers in Chicago, or the owner, thought it would be hip to buy a radio station, which was the new thing in the early 1920s. And because he knew her, and he knew that she had just a vast knowledge of all kinds of different things, he hired her to be the station manager. And nobody had any idea what broadcast programming would be. That was totally new. And so she was making it up as she went. But she also had, they would hire women. They would hire African Americans, for God's sake, because nobody was looking at, it was all audio. So they weren't having to worry about their reputation. And so anyway, it was like probably the first major industry that was somewhat free of racism and sexism.
Interesting.
Until television came along.
Well, yeah.
But anyway, both of these women that I took from had lost their jobs and had become drama teachers. And they had talked the school board into constructing a little studio for radio drama. And so the kids would do the sound effects and rattle the paper. And the funniest part was back then they used these RCA ribbon microphones, these sort of diamond shaped things that the BBC 30, whatever it is, microphone was an attempt at an improvement on the RCA.
Okay.
But they were bidirectional, and that meant the dead side, among other things, was right below it. And so they would print the scripts on a sort of a thick tissue paper. They'd be typed on this tissue paper. And so then you would read it, and then when you reached the end of a page, you would drop it, and it would fall.
Well, it makes complete sense now.
Fall under the microphone, and because it was dead, nobody would hear it. So that was one of the things I really remember. But anyhow, my dream was to get a job in radio. But one of my friends in the drama class, his father was the head of advertising for the Lincoln Mercury division of Ford Motor Company.
Okay.
And he was one of the sponsors of the Ed Sullivan Show in New York. And he, now I'm drifting off into Andrew Oldham land. And he was really connected. And so he got us a tour of ABC's broadcast facility in Detroit.
Amazing.
And we got to see the first videotape recorder in town.
Wow.
The first color TV camera, even though they weren't broadcasting color yet.
Oh, really? How cool is this?
And all this this wild technology, and they were the origination point for the network. And they would ship them 35 millimeter prints of the TV shows, and they had a room dedicated to streaming them onto the telephone lines that they distributed the video on.
Wow. So you would have been, what, 15 about this time? 14, 15?
I guess I was born in 45. This was 59. So.
Yeah, 14, 15.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's, I mean, it must have felt space age. It must have been.
Yeah. Oh, it was wild. So anyway, I wanted a job in radio, but this guy said, oh, well, you've got to have a college degree to work here. And I could not imagine having the money to get a college degree. I mean, that was just, no, I actually wound up doing some college based on some student loans, but I sort of gave up on radio. I also, I didn't realize that he was talking about the network jobs, and that you didn't need that to work for a local radio station, and you didn't. And if you were really successful at a local radio station, you could get a job at the network. So, yeah. I didn't know that back then, but I think also he didn't want me to drop out of school and what have you. So, but anyway, that led me to recording studios. And Detroit had two independent, well, there were several independent recording studios, but I guess you can't call one owned by a jingle company independent. I mean, they were basically recording their own. I mean, record label studio and a radio station studio aren't independent. They're owned by the body that the material is being created for.
Yeah.
So the independent studios were rented out primarily to advertising agencies for making radio commercials.
Okay.
And that was true in Detroit. That was true everywhere, actually. And that was the bread and butter work of studio musicians, was the advertising, not records.
Oh, okay.
A lot of people don't realize that.
No, well, yeah, I didn't. But
I used to kid that Motown was our musicians' hobby.
I bet it was a breath of fresh air for them coming and playing, playing songs like that.
Oh, yeah. So, in fact, that's why Motown ultimately had to leave Detroit, was because that business left Detroit and a lot of the musicians with it.
Oh.
And the whole music, and what happened in music was Chicago was the center of the music industry until the late 1966, 67, 68. And the rest of it was in New York. And Motown was I like to look at it as an artist management company that had its own label. Yeah. It wasn't really a record label in the same sense of others. And I don't think they made that much money off the records.
Oh, really?
They were a promotional vehicle for advancing the artists. Mm-hmm. And they were the music publishers of all the songwriters. And so the money was in the music publishing and getting shows for the artists. That was the real profit center, and the records were to promote the artist, basically. Mm-hmm. And although even then, at that, I mean, our artists were among the highest paid in the industry. Only they didn't know it. Because what happened was Barry had done distribution deals with a number of labels, and the one he thought was the most fair was Chess.
Okay.
And so they patterned the contracts after Chess's. And Chess was a relatively low percentage of the retail price of the record, but there was nothing deducted but actual advances paid to the artist and the musicians' fees for the sessions. You know, no charge for promotion, no charge for all the stuff. And it was based on the retail price of the record and not the wholesale price, which would double the number of the percentage. I didn't realize this until I was working with Quicksilver Messenger Service, and we signed a contract with Capitol, and I read the contract and was in utter shock because I knew about the Motown contracts from some of the artists that we'd talked about it. And I read this thing and I go, oh my God. And the next time I was in Detroit, I mentioned that to Barry Gordy's sister, Esther, and she laughed. She said, yeah, we knew it. She said the problem was that Barry took an attitude of well, if they can't figure out it's a good deal, the heck with them.
Yeah. Well, you don't make it like that in business if you don't, have an attitude like that sometimes.
And so that's why there's all the talk about how they all got ripped off. And I mean, the lawyers had a field day with it.
I can imagine, yeah.
Because they could say, well, if you were on such and such a label, you would be getting 15%. And in reality, in dollars and cents, our artists were taking home more money than the artists on the other labels. So great irony. And to this day, people think that they got ripped off. Go figure.
Yeah.
But anyway, it was very interesting because a whole lot of what we did at Motown was very unique and very. Barry had dealt with labels, but he had never really worked at a label. And the only people we had who had worked at a label were Barney Ailes, who ran the sales department. And Barry had a good relationship with him because he had owned a record store. And he knew Barney from that because Barney had been the Detroit distributor for Capitol.
Okay.
And so they knew each other, and they both knew a lot of how record store economics worked. And the big thing that they knew was that record stores all lost money 11 months a year.
I've got Christmas
and
time.
Hopefully made it back over Christmas.
Yeah.
And the record stores didn't pay their bills unless you had another record they needed.
Oh, yeah, interesting.
And that was easy for the majors, but that was hard for an independent.
Yes.
And so that was another reason that Motown spent an ungodly amount of money on producing the singles.
What was
because if we didn't get another hit, we didn't get paid for the last one.
I read in an interview so just focusing on singles for a second about how much attention went into them. They'd go through. Am I right in thinking that you mastered something between sort of 10 and 15 versions of Signed, Sealed, Delivered before you got the final one?
Oh God, at least probably more.
So they would just sort of keep revisiting in-house.
Keep remixing. We had what was called the quality control department. And what we would do is we would get the engineer would do 2 or 3 mixes. bring us the tape. We'd do what we called a rundown disc, where we'd get a rough level on the different takes, and it all went onto a 33 and a third, 10 or 12 inch, depending on how long it was. And then the quality control department would listen to them, and they would decide which one or two they liked the best. And then we'd go back and cut a Hot 45 single on each of them.
What would be the differences in the mixes? Was there specific things that they were changing for each one?
The amount of vocal, the way the low end worked, just all manner of things, really. Mm-hmm. Oh, and the producers were not allowed in the mix room.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Yeah. A few of the producers did their own mixes because they had come from engineering. And so Brian Holland was able to do mixes, but he was in competition with other people. I mean, everybody was in competition to get the release.
I see.
And the judge of the competition was the quality control department. And that was originally a woman named Billie Jean Brown, or Billie Jean Studmeyer, I think was her. I'm not sure which was her maiden name and which was her married name. But anyway, she was a really smart kid that Barry had run into, and she would judge a record basically on what it felt like to dance to and what it felt like to sing along with.
Okay, yeah. Well,
and that was the test.
Yeah.
And the amazing thing is that, after watching that, I discovered that I could tell. Doing, I didn't dance, but I could bop my head and sing along, and I could definitely tell which mix was better.
Would you reserve your judgment until it had been decided?
And I didn't judge. I mean, I wasn't part of that. But I realized that they were right 90% of the time. The producers hated them.
I can imagine they did, yeah.
But anyway, that was the process. But the thing is, all of those remixes, if the artist had been paying for that, it would have been horrible. Mm. And that's part of why they didn't charge the artists for studio time.
I guess it makes sense having, when it's all in sort of in-house like that, it doesn't seem to work by the hour. And if you're renting a studio, it's just part of the business of what the place is doing.
Yeah. Now, we were expected to, if we were doing a Hot 45 single, we were expected to get it out in 20 minutes.
Oh, wow.
And if we were doing a mix, we were expected to get a mix in 20 minutes.
Wow.
An 8-track.
Yeah, pressure.
And, if you would get an assignment of, okay, we want to do this, this, and this, and we'd work it through.
I suppose.
But it was an amazing process, and really brilliant. And it's a good thing that Berry Gordy had not worked at any other record labels, because that would have brought some preconceived notions into it. But it also wasn't, they publicized, he made some remarks about how, well, he got the idea from the assembly line of an auto company. And that's true in a way, in terms of we were dividing the work up, but we were dividing the work up largely to keep it objective.
Okay.
To come out of fresh ears, so to speak.
Yeah. It's the way that you speak about it it feels more like a family as opposed to when you talk about production lines. I've heard that analogy before about
Yeah,
Motown, and it doesn't feel personal. Whereas the way you speak about it feels like
yeah,
uh, almost you have as much ownership over the process as anybody else in the process. It
that's
feels like,
exactly how it was.
hmm. I wonder if it's not too technical, could you talk through the sort of details of the mastering process? So when you were doing, when you were doing a Hot 45, what exactly happened in that 20 minutes?
Well, you would listen to the song down and watch VU meter, and it was one particular meter that we had, and you kind of learned to do it. You would like throw a high pass filter on to see how much of what was on the meter was the bass. You would just kind of figure out, and we would actually set the level to 0.2 of a dB. It was very, very precise, and
Mm,
we had aligned the tape machine and aligned the cutting system that tight.
wow.
So it was very, very precise, and that's how we got so much bass and level on those records. It was actually precision, and we weren't doing any limiting. If we did EQ, well, I'll qualify that. We had a high frequency limiter that we used on the 33 and a third rundowns.
Okay.
But the 45s were cut at half speed using a variation on actually a British Decca
Okay.
approach. Although the irony is that in most cases, our cuts didn't wind up getting manufactured
Oh.
because RCA would guarantee their parts against skipping. And Barry had run into records coming into his store that had a skipping problem. And nothing would kill a record faster than something like that, because the stores would ship them all back. And the way radio worked, I mean, the payola thing is kind of hilarious. Motown never had enough money for payola. But all payola ever bought anybody was plays for 2 or 3 days until the radio station called up the local record stores and found out what people were buying.
Mm.
And if they weren't flying off the shelves, it was off the air. And it would probably have a harder time getting back on the air unless a nearby city had started flying off the shelves and they'd maybe take another chance on it. But that was critical part of the process. And so a skip could cost you a hit record easily.
Wow. Something I'd never even considered.
So for that reason, they wanted RCA doing all the plating and manufacturing the DJ copies. And RCA wouldn't guarantee it unless they made the lacquer. So we sent them a lacquer and the tape, and they had to match that.
I see. So they were copying your master.
Yeah.
Very strange.
Yeah, which is wild. And we were able to, well, they would gain a little bit because they had variable pitch, but because we were fixed pitch, our acetates were extremely, extremely consistent, uniform. And so we knew exactly how far we could push a record before it would skip.
Mm.
And we also had RCA skip tests that we could run.
Okay.
So, which was an interesting thing. It was a little cheap plastic record player with so you had a skip test record.
To have more bass on it,
and you would adjust the weights on the tone arm on the thing until they stopped skipping on this test record.
Okay.
And that was the test. Had to pass that. And RCA was going to be testing that at the pressing plant. So
I'm trying to just get my head around the test. So the test was in the weight of the stylus arm, as opposed to, I would imagine that was there sort of extreme frequencies happening on the test disc to test how much it skipped up?
To be honest, I never listened to
it. Okay.
I thought it was low frequencies. It was a little 45 disc.
Interesting.
So anyway, it was that combination of stuff was how we got the levels up that high. And until 1960, sometime in 1966, they decided, because they were having problems with the low end from RCA not matching the low end from Detroit.
Okay.
And so they had this idea of putting a very sharp 24 dB per octave 70 cycle high pass in the mastering chain. And then for everybody to be mixing, assuming that was going to be there.
Wow.
And so anything from Detroit, and probably, I'm not sure when they stopped that in California, because I went from Detroit to San Francisco, never worked for Motown in LA. Although my three best friends from Detroit actually wound up working there at one time or another.
So there we have it, part one of my conversation with Bob Olhsson. Hope you've enjoyed that. You'll notice that my little segue music has varied this week. That is partly because I haven't actually played the isolated drum stems yet. I'm at my studio. I don't know if you can hear the reverb in the room, but I decided that I was looking on my computer for something I could use as the segue. And that's a song that I put together a couple of weeks ago for quite an exciting project that you will hear more about over the coming months. But I quite like it. So there we go. Okay, so that just leaves me to say a big thank you to my good friend Joe Kane and David Henshaw for the artwork and the music for this podcast. You can get in touch with me. My email address is joe@allyouneedisdrums. If you'd like to find out more about my studio and the sessions I do and all that jazz, you can do that at my website, allyouneedisdrums.com. Have a lovely week, and I will speak to you next week. Goodbye!